Chairman, I'd like to drag this hearing back to what I thought it was about, which is financially rewarding terrorism in the West Bank, and with an eye towards that. The U.S. policy toward the Palestinians consists of three end goals: to establish a stable, I'm just reading them, lasting and peaceful end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through direct bilateral negotiations, that's one; two, to counter Palestinian terrorist groups; and three, to establish norms of democracy, accountability, and good governance. Now, the U.S. funding of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA, as we usually call it, runs counter to every single one of these three policy goals. UNRWA's ties to what I characterize and what many of us characterize as a terrorist organization, Hamas, both threaten bilateral negotiations and undermine U.S. efforts to counter Palestinian terrorist groups. Since 2006, Hamas-affiliated candidates have held all 11 seats on the UNRWA Teachers Union Executive Board. UNRWA schools use textbooks and materials that delegitimize Israel, denigrate Jews, and venerate martyrdom. These materials work to indoctrinate the Palestinian youth, making them susceptible to radical militant groups such as Hamas. The unfortunate yet foreseeable result of this curriculum can be seen in April 2016 poll that found that 78.6% of the youth in Gaza and 46.4% of the youth in the West Bank support the knife intifada. Furthermore, 76% of the terrorists taking part in the knife intifada were under the age of 30. Now, UNRWA's education system seems to have created a large pool of indoctrinated youth hell-bent on attacking Israelis. UNRWA's employees are screened for ties to terrorism, but the vetting system, believe it or not, focuses on things like Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, but does not focus on Hamas or Hezbollah. It's crazy. 95.5% of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza believe the Palestinian Authority is corrupt, and 82% of Gazans believe Hamas is corrupt. Yet UNRWA effectively works as a support service for both of these organizations, taking care of basic government services. This, in effect, subsidizes, with American dollars, these groups' corrupt and oftentimes terroristic activities. The total annual budget for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, or UNRWA, for FY15 was $1,246,802,614. And since its inception in 1950, the United States has contributed more than $5.6 billion to the agency, more than any other single nation. And in FY15, the United States contributed $390.5 million, making it up 31% of the agency's budget. Do any of you fine gentlemen on the panel object to my legislation, which would prevent U.S. taxpayers from continuing to fund this agency? Sure.
I don't know if I object or I support it. I certainly support the intention, but if I may, let's say you pass your legislation. Let's say it's implemented, and UNRWA in Gaza closes up.
It doesn't close up. We just don't fund it anymore. My tax dollars, your tax dollars, their tax dollars don't fund it anymore.
I get it, and we pay a disproportionate amount of UNRWA dollars based on the UN formula. So when your legislation is successful and UNRWA no longer can implement the programs it implements in Gaza, the ones you're objecting to, rightfully so, who's going to run the sewer plant, the one that's already pushing sewer into the sea that not only destroys the Palestinian coast but the Israeli coast? What are those children going to do?
I guess somebody's going to have to make a decision on what their priorities are.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
I say that a dirty sea and sewage is bad, but it's better than people being stabbed, blown up, rocketed, etc.
Totally agree with you.
Okay.
But let's also be realistic. The people with the knives, thank goodness, are not coming from Gaza. Gaza is essentially walled off to Israel. The people with the knives are coming from the West Bank. So what you do in Gaza is not going to prevent the people with the knives. You want to prevent the people with the knives, I would respectfully suggest the Israeli government should complete the security fence and create borders that they're...
That's what they can do, but what we can do is stop funding the training camps that would be described as our elementary schools, our daycares, our middle schools,
Yes.
right? We're funding that.
And I'm deeply troubled by it.
Troubled?
Yeah.
We got to be more than this. With all due respect, sir.
Yes.
We're all troubled, all right? We're talking about action here. This hearing is about the funding of terrorism, taxpayer funding, and that's why I asked the question.
That's right.
So while we
Yes.
talk about platitudes here, and we're all troubled, and we all are, rightfully so, yourself included, we have an opportunity here to do something.
And all I would suggest is, if you're going to do that, which obviously your bill stands for that, then at least have round 2 figured out on how you're going to achieve your purpose, which is minimize terrorism, not enhance it. So yes, if you're taking that first step, which may be very legitimate, figure out step 2, which is, as the follow-up, how are you actually reducing terrorism as opposed to creating an even greater incentive?
With all due respect, sir, I hear what you're saying, but the policy of that comes to, and I thank your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, what I see as appeasement at some point, that it's my duty to figure out how to solve that problem, or I must pay some blood money, extortion. It seems counterintuitive to every moral code that I've ever followed in my life.
And if I may, I couldn't agree with you more, and I would just respectfully suggest that before you reach your ultimate conclusion, you sit down with our Egyptian allies and our Israeli allies and our Jordanian allies and ask them what their suggestions would be for round 2 to make sure you don't make this.
Maybe round 1 can be a forcing function. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, Mark.